right now for people, and this is in the subgroup of people who tend to do things. So this is not children, this is not seniors, the senior, you know, when surveying people who are likely to go into the marketplace and do things, go to the movies, go on a cruise, go to a conference, take a plane, train, you know, participate actively, go out to eat, go to a bed and breakfast. So in that universe, in general terms right now, the audience of consumers is in three parts. You know, if the election were held today, if Pennsylvania were open today, this would be generally the reaction. About 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. 1/3 of people indicate they're pretty much ready to start doing stuff today if the government gave them the all clear. And that's for a host of reasons we don't need to go into. Some of it's their personal feelings, some of which they're just looking for the government to give the A-OK. About 1/3 of the folks have no intention of going anywhere amongst crowds until there's a vaccine that would protect them or their families. And that's for a whole host of reasons, whatever they may be. They have a unique situation. They have an autoimmune disease. Their parents have a disease. Their children have asthma, whatever that may be. They're just terrified, whatever. So the other third, like in a marketing campaign or a political campaign, the other third is what we should really be thinking about, again, above and beyond what the law is, because the third that are ready to come, and the third that aren't likely to come out for a few months is a different world and sort of out of your control and mine. The third in between are looking to find places that are safe. What does that mean? And it was actually an analyst who happens to live in Bryn Mawr, but whose offices are in New York and San Francisco, that calls it the Goldilocks principle. And since I've now participated in 2 or 3 events, and the U.S. Chamber seems to be echoing that, why not go with it? So not too much, not too little, but just right. A business, to be successful, is going to have to prove to its employees and its customers, whether you're in B2B or B2C, that you are doing what is required by your local government and then some. Yet, they don't want to see people walking around in sort of, you know, science fiction EPA bubble suits, you know, spraying chemicals, because at that point the consumer then says, well, why am I here? So the guidance is really that Goldilocks principle. You need to do that, which will make people feel safe, yet not having to do so much. And if you have to do that much, you may want to question about how you're engaging with customers or engaging with the public or engaging with your employees. And secondly, if you've had the opportunity to participate, to eat with or do business with certain businesses, you may notice, or if you have friends or family that are doing businesses in states that are further along the opening continuum than us, Ohio, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, Texas, you can see from their websites, and you can certainly steal and borrow. But I would say, you know, as a standard, you know, if you were to go to Chipotle and go get a meal, you will notice now that Chipotle puts in its bag with your meal a very professionally made laminated card that's about 5 by 7 with nice graphics and big print, easy to read. But it walks through, these are the 5 things that we're doing here to keep you safe. This is how we prepare your food. This is how we serve your food. This is how you pay. And this is how we present the food to you. And it's that sort of model that you may see that businesses are doing, somewhere between the good housekeeping seal of approval and in going into a restaurant and they're posting a certificate that the health department says that they're recognized, they're complying with sanitized and health and safety standards. And that's sort of what you're looking for. It's going to be able to articulate in a professional way, easy to understand. These are the standards. This is how we clean. This is how we engage you. This is what we're doing. And we're happy to share samples, but I would encourage you, particularly if you're in a business where you belong to another trade association and you have peers operating in some of those other states, again, I would tell you that looking on websites, you'll see it. And you can run to your nearest Chipotle in Westchester, Malvern, or King of Prussia, and you will see they'll put their card, and that'll give you an idea. It's that Goldilocks principle. Goldilocks combined with transparency, explaining, and it's also One, it's showing folks that you're sensitive to the law. And two, you're putting your customers in a mindset of saying you're taking this seriously. And again, that varies whether you're in food service or handing contracts or you have to exchange credit cards or what have you. So first, there's sort of the environment and what we need to do. And then there's the preparing and the planning. From the preparing standpoint, I would recommend that you begin by going to the governor's webpage, and it's the information that's on our webpage for reopening. The governor has a 7-page document that, if you have color graphics, or is sort of dark blue, powder blue, black and white, 7 pages of what you need to do. What are the standards for reopening as you move from red to yellow and then yellow to green? We can only dream. And it walks through everything from planning to preparing. You will then see that there are hyperlinks for what happens if. And one of the things you'll then look at is what happens if a customer or an employee believes that he or she has COVID-19, and the things you have to do, from closing for 24 hours, cleaning your facility, cleaning and contacting the people that are involved. Now, again, my proviso, that's not a legal standard. That's not an employment standard. That's just reading in plain English, and I encourage you to look at it. So you begin with the governor's 7-pager, and then click on the links for what if, which will then take you to Department of Health from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or the CDC's guidelines of what happens. You will wind up with about 20 pages of things. So in our preparing, step one is, what does the law say? And make sure that you read those and take a look. And then whatever your internal business model is, do you have an HR attorney? Do you have a general manager? Do you have a personnel director? Do you work with a law firm? You know, what is your touchstone for making sure that your business is operating in a full compliance way? What are you doing? Again, that same model. And then the second is the planning. How will you communicate with your employees? How will they be spaced out? How can you run staffing? Again, what's your business look like? Can you stagger your staffing hours? Are you able to arrange desks or workspaces so that they're 6 feet or more apart? Are there people who do back office operations that might be able to stay home? Because one of the things you'll see in the governor's standards is, as we move from red to yellow and even yellow to green, there'll be this constant theme. If you're able to work from home and be a contributing member of the business, you're going to be asked to stay at home or come into the office or the place of business as little as possible. And again, thousands of different businesses, that means thousands of different things. So in the planning, it's your staffing schedules, staffing workspace, who can work at home. Again, the business layout. Again, for those of you who've been out and have done things, you know, from going to the Acme that it wants us to follow sort of a snake pattern, to the post office that puts the yellow lines and says, this is 6 feet, this is 6 feet. That puts the plastic up in front of the counter when you go for takeout. You know, if you're going to reopen, do you have those things? Can you put some sort of protective shield at the counter to protect your cashier or the customer service person? Can you mark out 6 feet so that people waiting in line know how to wait and get out? For your customers, will you have something published on your front door? Again, this is very different if you're a B2B or a B2C, but what information can you transmit to someone coming into your business? What can you put on your web page to say this is it? Next is the cleaning. Not only the, heaven forbid, what happens when an employee has COVID-19, but what are you going to do? Because again, everybody has their own model. You may clean your offices once a month. You may do it every other week. You may have done it once a week. What are you going to do now? And what are you going to do for those common areas? The doorknobs coming in and out of your business. The touch screen, if that's how you pay or that's how you order. The restrooms. The common areas, if you have a professional building and you have some sort of cafeteria area, or do you have a waiting area? You're going to have to think about those things, because those things are probably going to require at least daily cleaning. And in some places like heavy traffic, you know, think of a Wawa, they're going to be cleaning that touch screen and their door handles multiple times a day. And then go back to what we said at the beginning. This is partly about legal standards, And it's partly about giving a sense of comfort and safety. The other is you're going to need somebody on your office, whether you have a staff of 3, 13, 33, or 300, who's going to be the go-to person when there's an incident. Who is it going to be reported to, and who's going to be in charge of communicating to the other people on staff or tracking who that staff person came in contact with you. Just like you may have, a shop steward if you have a union business, or a GM, or an employment, an HR person, employee benefits, employee relations, depending on how big and how large your structure is. But who's the go-to person on staff? Who's going to keep track of when did Mary get sick? When did John get sick? When did Guy first say he had symptoms? That person's going to have to track it, be in charge of recording it, notifying who people came in contact with, and reporting it to the Chester County Department of Health. We here at the ABC Widget Company want you to know that on May 17th, Guy Ciarrocchi reported a fever and a cough. We sent him home, and he's self-quarantined, and you report that information in. So those are just some of the things that I would think about. And then there's one other that I would just share that probably doesn't apply to a lot of us, but does. In the event that you applied for and were successful in getting either a PPP loan from the federal government, or actually through your bank, insured by the federal government, an EIDL disaster loan from SBA, or a state loan through the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority, you want to make sure that you have in place, working with, again, your accountant, your business manager, your general manager, whoever does your bookkeeping, that you are keeping records of how did that money come in and how did we spend it? Because on the back end, you're going to have to go back to SBA or your bank or the state of Pennsylvania and show a metric of how the money was used and how it was spent, particularly with PPP, where you're going to want to be able to convert that money to a grant. So you've sort of got to keep, and I'm sure we've all had to do this at times, but you're going to do budgeting within budgeting. You're going to have your operation. So that'd be the one thing that probably doesn't apply to a ton of our businesses, but it applies to some. So we wanted to share that because, I'll just conclude with this. As is now aware to all of you, I hope, from reading our webpage and seeing the daily local news and Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, we have been one of the loudest voices for encouraging the government to begin to plan and think about reopening. And we will continue to do that, but we will work equally hard in answering your questions and trying to provide information so that if you choose to open, you can the day we're allowed to open. Because what we're, as much as we would like that calendar to move fast, it's equally important to us that if the governor gives the go-ahead on May 25th or on June 25th or July 25th, that we want to make sure we've played a role with our members in the community, that everybody's in a position to go when the governor says it's time to go. And that's really what we see our roles right now, those two fronts. One is being an advocate for a smart, safe, fast reopening, but at the same time being a resource. So with that, please unmute, ask questions, share suggestions, tell us what you're hearing from your colleagues in other groups. Again, I'm happy to answer questions, but I also would hope there's an opportunity where each of you learn and can share with one another because you're on the ground dealing with customers. Marion, thanks. That's it.
Hi, my name's Cathy Carroll. We joined probably in February, so that's why we haven't been around much. But we have a payroll company, and one of the things that we've been doing with our clients with the PPP loan is planning out the 8 weeks. And there's one client in particular who's a nonprofit, and so her expenses outside of payroll are very minimal. So she has almost 95% of her PPP loan she needs to spend on payroll. So, but here's my question. Have you seen any definitive direction as to do the funds just have to be paid within that 8 weeks? Do they have to be earned within that 8 weeks? Because there's, if you only have to spend 75%, you kind of can accomplish that pretty easily. But in her case, she almost has to take that previous payroll where she's paying them within that 8 weeks to get to that 95%. I know it's kind of specific, but.
No, it's okay. Look, and on the nonprofit front, very early on, we were one of the first chambers that then joined with others and said we thought the nonprofit community and houses of worship were going to be devastated by this because they were going to have more services called upon them and receive little or no in the way of donations.
Yeah.
And there's actually a provision that we helped lobby with Senator Toomey that reinstated all the charitable deductions that had been in the old federal tax code that weren't in the new, to try and encourage contributions. So to your point, PPP was created largely for states like ours to pay people not to work. It was to trying to keep the business solvent, to keep a sense of connection between employers and employees. So you're paying people largely in a county like Chester County or this region, you were paying people not to work. And it was understood that that would happen, and you have to track it accordingly. And to the extent that they're able to work from home or dial in or do whatever remotely or on Zoom, great. But you were paying for that, and you just have to go back and show that that happened. And when the money runs out, the money runs out. And we discussed this on a call yesterday. The irony is you may have had employees on unemployment. You then take them off unemployment, you're going to give them their 8 weeks of PPP, and then there's a chance that you won't be allowed to have reopened, and you're going to place them back on unemployment. But the idea back in March was to try and keep as many businesses across the country afloat.
So, but the question that's out there is when you're planning out this, I mean, the end date is the end date. So, we're planning right date, but do they have to be earned within that 8 weeks? So that's
Yes.
the question. That's kind of that murky
Yes.
thing right there. They do have to be earned
They
within.
do.
Okay.
Now, they do. Having said that, as you know, because the government's working in hyperdrive and most of the folks in the federal government are also working from home, the SBA is updating their guidance, as you know, almost daily.
Right.
And they are very cognizant. So the first thing they did is, the initial date for sort of compliance was May 7th. They pushed that back to May 14th, in part because they know a lot of the country's in shutdown, but in part because they weren't ready. So I imagine between now and May 14th, we're going to see some more changes, especially since they're aware that most places are still shut down. But the initial answer to your question is yes. You
Has
have
to be
do it
within the 8 weeks. Okay.
Yep.
And then the other question I had too is you just kind of talked about that. I'm hearing that people who have employees on unemployment and are actually earning more on unemployment because of the additional $600 are getting pushback for their employees not wanting to come back. But my understanding is they have to come back if they're offered a job, otherwise they're not eligible for unemployment. Is that correct?
They do, and it varies from state by state, but here in Pennsylvania, yes. They
Okay.
would lose. They clearly lose the $600 from the CARES Act, the federal additional distribution. However, you as an employer would have to report them to the state. So again, I work for you, Cathy. You say to me, "Hey, Guy, you're going to go back on the payroll. We're going to reopen on Monday," and I say, "No, thanks," because you pay me $585 a week. I can make 600 or 700 on unemployment. No, thanks. I'm going to continue to get my check if you don't report me to the Department of Labor. So the sort of moral legal conundrum that employers are in is you have to, because you're certifying that I can get my check.
Mm-hmm.
So if you report me, yes, I lose my $600 and will eventually lose my Pennsylvania portion as well. Yes. And that's specific in black and white in the CARES Act.
So then, as an employer, then if you report them, you also have ruined your relationship with that employee too. So yeah, it's a tough road to go. Thank you.
Yeah, the last thing I would just say in terms of compliance, the SBA did change their guidance this week. A lot of employers were concerned because, as we were talking about earlier, you have to use the money on payroll. So you offer Guy the money, and Guy says, "I don't want to come back." The SBA this week issued guidance saying if you you have to document in writing. So you have to send me a letter or an email that says, "Guy, come back to work May 11th," and Guy has to write back and say no. If you have a bona fide paper trail that shows that there was a job and you offered it and was turned down, that you will not be held liable in your conversion to a grant because you made a good faith offer and the employee didn't comply.
That's in terms of the number of employees that you have.
And,
Not.
and in terms of the payroll that you would have allocated to me.
Oh.
You can't be held. In other words, you as the
Yeah.
employer can't be held responsible if I don't come back. You intended to pay me on a scale of $42,000 a year. If I don't come back, the $6,000 you borrowed to pay me, you can't be held responsible and have to pay that as a loan. Still be eligible to be converted to a grant. But you're going to have to show that you offered the job and I
Document
turned
it.
it down. And
Okay.
I would tell you, you would probably want to go the extra step of posting that job somewhere on your webpage, on Monster, on Indeed, somewhere to say we have an opening for a clerk, a technician, an accountant. I would go that extra step. That's just my, I
Yeah.
would want to show you tried.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. My name is Lauren McComas, and I run two businesses. I'm the president and artistic director of Salt Performing Arts, which is a nonprofit theater company in Chester Springs. And then I also own and run Stage Light, which is a for-profit LLC that does summer camps and kid programs all year long. So I'm having a lot of fun with that business. My two questions are, have you heard any scuttlebutt about summer camps and if they'll happen? Because for a lot of our families that are involved, it is childcare. And while theaters can't open until green, childcare can open in yellow. And so I'm super curious if we'll be able to open as a summer camp, keeping the numbers in each room less than 25. And then, well, that would be my first question.
So I haven't, except that the continued reminder as I tune into the press briefings that the governor and Secretary Levine do. Remember, yellow caps things at 25.
Right.
So at a minimum, again, I think if I were you, I would begin to try to make the argument that you're a daycare, that you're more analogous to a daycare. And I would start looking at what the safety protocols that the state has put forth in terms of what goes into a daycare that would be allowed to open. But so you're going to have to, all that stuff. So I have not heard that specifically, other than the continuous reminder of the 25. And there is not a single call, national, state, or local, that we don't do where we don't spend a significant time talking about the daycare summer camp crisis. That we are, I would tell you from a chamber world, we're all aware that whether the governor says go on May 25th, June 25th, or July 25th, there is a segment of the workforce that will not be able to go back because they will have children that will have nowhere to go if we don't solve the daycare, childcare, summer camp problem.
Right.
So all of which to say, I haven't heard anything other than to look at it in that prism and be aware of the yellow versus green.
Yeah, thank you. And then also, so we did get the PPP for both Salt and Stage Light, which is great. But at the end of the 8 weeks, if we're not able to open summer camps, then we have a problem. So can business owners get unemployment after you've played out the PPP?
Yes, under the CARES Act, you can be a sole proprietor, a self-employed consultant. So yes, you can. And depending how you're organized, you can either get unemployment because you're getting a pay from a business, from a 501c3 or C4 or whatever it may be, or if you're organized as a sole proprietor or as a partnership, yes. So the good news is under the CARES Act, they wrote it in such a way that it covers every single type of employee in terms of the federal dollars. So you would theoretically be eligible for the $600 a week that comes through the CARES Act. You would not be eligible for the Pennsylvania portion because Pennsylvania does not pay independent contractors or the self-employed.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So how would you apply for that? Because the 600 is tied into the Pennsylvania, like unemployment. Like, so how would
Yeah.
you apply
So
for that?
you would still go to Pennsylvania. You'd still go to the unemployment. It would if you look now, their drop down bars have changed. One of the reasons they're having this enormous backlog is there are nearly 2 million people looking. But one of it is they had to change their, if you will, their software and their drop down bars to comply with CARES. It now does. So if you had applied in February, you would have been automatically kicked out, or there would have been nowhere for you to click a box and say, this is me. It now is, if you check now, it's now there. You can identify yourself as self-employed or a sole proprietor.
Got it.
Hi,
And
can I?
I'm sorry, sure, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No,
Finish
I
what
was going to say, and that should last for the foreseeable future.
I just wanted to comment back to Lauren. My name's Lori. I own Fawnbrook Bed and Breakfast in Westchester.
Yes.
So obviously I'm in a really tight spot because we can't virtually bed and breakfast.
Right.
But two things. One, I did see, it just came across the computer. I'm reading everything. Wayne Art Center. I don't know if you've been in touch with, if you know anyone there.
Yeah.
Apparently they canceled their first portion of summer camps, but are still promoting and looking to host starting in July. So you may just want to reach out and see kind of how they're handling it. And then just to add on to the unemployment, what came out for business owners, because I was not able to apply for the typical unemployment, was the PUA. So when you go to file, it's the pandemic unemployment assistance as opposed to the regular unemployment. And now it's all across the screen on the unemployment for actual business owners.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Can I comment about Kathy's question about the 8-week income period?
Yeah, sure, Deb, go ahead.
So, Guy, thanks to you, you helped me get in contact with one of the auditing accounting firms that are doing a webinar for my industry, which is the towing and automotive repair. So I'm president of our association. I'm setting up a webinar with Chrysler Miller. And one of the things that they told me about the 8-week period and the earning period, Kathy, is that it's running on cash, not accrual basis.
Mm-hmm.
So if your pay period ends after that 8-week
After the start, or
start, then you know you're kind of out of luck. But if you're paying them in the 8-week pay period for the pay period prior to the 8 weeks, you're still, it's whenever that check is cut.
okay.
So if the check is cut in that 8-week period, you're good. If
Okay.
it's outside of that 8-week period, you're not.
Yeah, because that was her situation. So let's say she was paying him from 4:15 to 4:30, and she got her funds on 4:29, and she was going to pay him on 5/5. So she'd be paying them within that 8 weeks. But then it also, at the end, she has to cut that 2-week pay period down to 1 week to get that last check within that 8 weeks. Okay, so she would be fine then.
Which, according to what they told me, you're allowed to do, because I also I already looked out to the end of the 8 weeks to see where my payroll lands.
Yeah.
And I will be cutting a check early.
Yeah.
Because they worked the time, I can pay them whenever I want. As long as I'm paying them for actual time worked.
Right.
During that period.
Okay, so she would be fine then. Okay. All right. Thank you, Deborah.
Welcome.
And one of the things I would say with the PPP to just bear in mind, and this is a good news, bad news, case by case, is that it is a federally backed program. It is a federally backstopped program, and there are SBA guidelines. Remember, you got the loan from a bank.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, it will be a bank that you have some relationship with. In some cases, you didn't because your credit union didn't participate. But you can ask them questions about compliance, because at the end of the day, again, for better or worse, and there'll probably be as many good stories as horror stories, is the bank is going to sign off
Mm-hmm.
and determine whether
Yeah.
they're going to let you convert it to a grant. And again,
That's
with
correct.
10,000 financial institutions, everybody's going to look at the SBA guidance and they're going to sort of do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're PNC Bank or Benchmark Federal Credit Union or PayPal, they're all going to look and say. So I think sometimes too, it's, you want to think before you ask the question, but you can certainly ask the question if you're midway through, or is what are you guys going to be looking for on the back end to
Mm-hmm.
prove that?
But Guy, I haven't
And
seen anything on the SBA website that clearly answers that question. So
correct.
that's been kind of the
Yeah.
problem. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I think it's one of the reasons they kicked the can from May 7th to May 14th,
Okay.
is they're still doing it.
So by
And
May 4th,
realize still there's still 100, much to everybody's surprise, there's 100 billion, give or take, still left. So there's some people going to be applying this week and getting money next week, and their 8 weeks is going to run a whole different time
cycle.
frame.
Yeah. So there is PPP money still available
Yes.
as far as you know?
Yep.
Okay.
As of yesterday, it was at 100 billion. And just to put that in context, sort of, with all sorts of numbers and factoids in our heads are all hurting. Phase 1 was 349 billion. Phase 2 was 310. That was those two together were supposed to take care of the 8-week payroll of every single small business in the United States of America. Now, what happened? Because of the legalese and smart lawyers and accountants, you got the Los Angeles Lakers, Chris. So some of the money got gobbled up and some of it got shamed and put back into the till. But I mean, there was really an intent to try and, if you will, everybody keeps saying everybody has their own analogies, but I mean, the Titanic hit the iceberg and everybody was in the water. And the SBA just started throwing life preservers. And the hope was everybody would get a life preserver and kick in the water for 8 weeks, and then we'd see what happens. And part of the challenge is, if you live in a state like Pennsylvania, is we've been kicking around in the water for about 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting a little anxious that what's next. Now, again, if you apply this week for PPP and you get your money May 15th, you've got a lifeline to get you to July. But if you got your PPP money April 11th, you're getting a little anxious.
But Guy, I think what I'm hearing too is a lot of people were having struggles finding banks that would process it for them because the banks were so overwhelmed.
The banks were overwhelmed, and the SBA was overwhelmed. The idea was, could you imagine if everybody had to go to the SBA site? The SBA site would still be down. So the attempt was to get it to banks. The challenge with the banks is, first of all, some banks decided to do what banks do, what a lot of us do in the world. The people with $100 million in banking at PNC went to the top of the list. And I'm not, forget his PNC, ABC Bank. Shockingly, banks took care of their larger customers first. Then banks took care of their own customers first. So if your financial institution was a credit union or a tiny community bank that didn't participate, you had to go find a safe haven. And as your last resort, you looked in your wallet and you realized you had a Chase credit card. So you tried to go to Chase and tell them, hey, I have a business relation with you. I have a credit card. You gave me an $11,000 line of credit. So it was hard, which is why in the second round, they decided to say any bank, any credit union that could apply to participate. And then they opened it up to the fintech, to the Quicken Loans and the PayPals.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those places are not necessarily built to do it. So it was very, very chaotic. And against that, the banks would tell you that, I've done calls with the banks. Concurrent to the whole lending process, there's a process to be certified to participate. So you have the new institutions, a lot of credit unions and tinier banks that were asking SBA, please let us be a certified lender. So that was happening. Then there was a third process that's really in the weeds, and I could bore you forever, trust me. But whereas like bigger banks like WSFS, told basically everybody, you're now a loan processor. I don't care what you're a community banker, you're a handshaker, you're a municipal lender, you're okay. So WISP has tried to convert 101 employees into loan processors. It took them 2 weeks to get the SBA to certify those men and women so that they had their own loan numbers and processing numbers. So look at the SBA. They're trying to push the money out the door. They're trying to approve loans. They're trying to welcome in new banks, and then they're trying to certify individual staff members at banks. I mean, no wonder this thing has been such a
I have a question
a cluster, because it was all happening concurrently.
on the PPP.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You've been talking about it's used to pay people not to work. Isn't it also the rent, utilities?
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 questions. One, if you still had to pay some rent before you got the money, so you're writing out checks, that's enough to justify that you use the funds for what you're supposed to use them for, right? Showing the checks being paid
In the period where you've gotten the money, because your clock runs when you get the money. Your clock runs when you take the money.
Okay, and then, so if we paid rent for April and May and we just got the money Monday, those checks are okay or no?
When did you
No.
pay when did you pay it before, right?
We had to pay for April, and I mean, we were closed, but we had to pay for April and we had to pay for May. You know, it was due May 1st.
It starts from the date that you were funded.
Okay, so then going to that, the funding. So we filed and asked for X amount of dollars and received an eighth. What happens? So is that end of story? That's all we're going to get?
Yes.
I don't know what your personal situation is in your finances, but if you reported the proper payroll
Yes.
numbers and expenses,
Tax
I don't really
return.
understand why you would have gotten an eighth, but
Yeah, and PNC was our bank, and they called like Sunday night and said, you know, this is the amount that blah, blah, blah that you applied for. And then 2 days later, what came in the checking account was an eighth of what they said. So it's kind of strange because it doesn't even cover 1 month's rent, or let alone payroll or utilities.
So that's probably worth a conversation with them, with somebody there, to figure out what their formula, what their decision was. Because on the back end, you're supposed to, in theory, it's sort of money in, money out. You use a formula to arrive at $287,000 based upon this. They give you $287 and you spend it. If you ask for $100,000 and they gave you $15,000 on the back end, how are you supposed to match it up? You clearly can't pay all the things you had hoped to. So I think that's where it's a very individualistic question to PNC, saying, okay, so what do you want me to pay out of this? Because I can't pay staff and utilities and rent.
So when I go to PNC, they say, go to SBA.
No, because
something's wrong there. I mean,
Yeah,
every bank is following the same guidelines.
So that's why I was like,
but on the back end, it's going to be PNC's decision as to how much, if any, of your money is allowed to be converted to a grant. It's not the SBA's decision. PNC is going to certify to SBA that Jackie got $87,000 and we converted $77,000 of it to a grant. It's now a $10,000 loan at 1%. That's a PNC decision reporting back to the SBA. So for them, for anybody there to say, sorry, it's not us. No, I mean, you're not going to sit with the SBA. SBA is not going to send you documents in 8 weeks and say, fill out this, M22 form. It's going to be the bank.
So, right.
And the bank will have 60 days to make that decision on what's forgivable and what's non-forgivable, just so you know.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 75% of that money or more had to go towards payroll. Is that correct?
75%.
So depending on how much you got and how much your rent versus payroll is, it may not shake out the way you need it to.
Right. Okay.
Can I ask, I apologize, my internet was down, but I've been reading through my AICPA that it's possible that they're going to extend that 8-week period to start once the state has reopened. Guy, have you read that or seen that? Rather than starting, sort of changing that loan origination date from the date that it was actually received to the date that the state was out of quarantine.
So I can only tell you that hasn't happened, and that question has been, I participate in almost daily phone calls with the U.S. Chamber, sometimes with officials from SBA or not. I can only tell you that question has been asked since March, and the answer continues to be that's not what the regs are now. And that they're aware of states like Pennsylvania not being open. And you're to pay people not to work, and you're to pay your landlord rent even though you're not operational. I can't tell you that on May 14th or May 25th or June 1st that they won't pass legislation or change the regs, but I can only tell you that you are asking one of the most popular questions that's been asked, and the answer has been routinely the same. There is nothing to take into account.
Already answered that on this call.
No, not at all. No, as I said to you, it's one of the most popular, most thoughtful questions. It's a very common sense question, which is, what do we do? How do we pay people? How do we pay rent if we're not, open? And the answer is you're paying. They were aware of that, and they wanted you to tread water for 8 weeks.
And why they gave you the loan for 10 weeks, but you can only count 8 weeks worth of payroll doesn't make any sense either. But I'll take the 10.
There was a long answer about that at one point, and that was like 36 conference calls ago, and I forget it. It wasn't, look, I'm not at all apologizing, and it's not my legislation. I would just tell you that, it was very much a sense early on, that the nation's economy was the Titanic had hit the iceberg, the boat was going down, and people were drowning. So there was, 1 week of collegiality in Congress where everybody put their swords down. They passed the largest stimulus bill in the history of the nation. They came up with some regulations which were based on a bit of common sense and a bit of politics, and threw the money out there. And which is why you got some snafus and some things that don't make sense. And it's why you have the SBA updating regulations 2 or 3 times a week. It's why CARES Act 2 looked a little different. I would just share this. The government, Congress, if you've done any of the calls with Senator Toomey, Senator Casey, or Congressman Houlihan, they refer to these as phases. So there was phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and the CARES Act was sort of phase 3 and then phase 3A. The next is phase 4. Nobody expects that to go into effect, to be passed into law until June. And the collegiality and teamwork and camaraderie has gone out the window. Speaker Pelosi's wish list looks nothing like Senate Majority Leader McConnell's list. And there's very little likelihood that there'll be a large PPP or EIDL component to the 4th wave. It'll be much more focused on things like hospitals or state governments, and then issues surrounding liability. But right now they're talking past each other. This is not I want a loaf of bread, you want a slice, where do we meet in the middle? Which is, you compare the speaker's list to the Senate Majority Leader's list, and there's no commonality. So they may add in some changes to regulations, but it's really not expected that more money's coming, unless they do individual money to people the way they did back in March and April. There's some talk of sending another $1,000 or $2,000 to people individually, but I don't think there'll be another large PPP type program.
Okay, so we are past time, which is wonderful because I feel like this conversation could go on and on. Better this way than the other, right? So thank you so much, everybody, for taking time to come on. Thank you, especially Guy. We all know how busy you are. Keep up that good fight and stay out there and keep fighting for the businesses here in Chester County. I know everybody, all of our members appreciate that. please know that we are planning on having these conversations every Friday. There is one at 10:30 or 10:15 in the morning, and then another, actually the same topics will be covered at 2:15 in the afternoon. So please look forward to those and please sign up for those. We are also hosting a series of town halls with our elected officials. They will be regional or cut into regions, east, west, north, south. So look for information on that in your inbox this afternoon. They are taking place next week. So I'm sure that you all will find them very interesting and you will be invited to attend those as well. So thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful day and weekend, and you know, let's stick together. We'll get through it.
And I would just say, please stay in touch. Feel free to call us, email us, let us know what you think. And if you have individual questions, and then, you know, if you have the opportunity to participate in other calls with elected officials or trade groups, please do. Please speak up and let us know what you hear so we can do our job better for you. And we will do our best to be a resource and also for you guys to be able to share information with one another. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.